Hey, all you literary legends and luminaries. I'm Julie, and welcome to another episode of Booksmart. Today's book is a memoir called Troubled, a memoir of foster care, family, and social class by Henderson. This book intrigued me because I teach at a juvenile detention center. The children Henderson writes of in his book make up 99.9% of my student population. Henderson contends that we speak of education like a be-all, end-all solution, as if an education will resolve a child's tumultuous or abusive or traumatic childhood, and this education will turn the child into a successful, high-achieving adult. Henderson isn't attacking our educational system. Even in the introduction, he said that he had many teachers that urged him to apply himself, who encouraged him to work to his potential. Rather, what Henderson is attempting to prove in Troubled is that family is of utmost importance and that the rich are the only ones who benefit from societal standards and that those standards actually hurt the rest. As a teacher, I know I've spoken to my students this way several times, telling them that education is their key out of the mess of their lives. So I was curious what Henderson would reveal about it. Before I move on, I need to admit something. When I bought this book, it had a Barnes & Noble sticker on it, and it stuck right here. I know you can't quite see this, but I didn't see Dr. Drew's name. If I had, I probably wouldn't have bought it. From my days of watching Celebrity Rehab, remember that show, and Teen Mom, Dr. Drew infuriated me to the point I had to turn the channel. He coddles addicts, enables them, and doesn't even have the guts to stand up to some immature, entitled teen mom. I could go on and on, but I'll spare you. When I saw this after I removed the sticker, I contemplated returning the book. That's how much Dr. Drew infuriates me. His little side smirk that he gives but never puts the addict in their place. Can't stand it. And I haven't watched Teen Mom in years, and well, primarily due to all the celebrities who died after attending Dr. Drew's Celebrity Rehab. That show hasn't been on for over a decade. But in my older, wiser age, I thought such thinking was ridiculous and should not have any bearing on what I thought of Henderson's book. Please remember this once I get towards the end of this Booksmart episode. It will be important later. The bulk of Henderson's memoir is chronological and reads like a memoir. He will add in some research here and there, which you know I love and appreciate. The first few years of Henderson's life are sad, tragic, and very unstable. He never met his dad. His mother is a drug addict, and he is taken from the home when he is 3. His mother is sent back to South Korea, and Henderson is put in foster care. As you can imagine, his experiences in foster care are not that great. Due to his poor performance in school, a psychologist comes to test him. As a teacher, this part really intrigued me. And so let me read it to you because it was very eye-opening for me. After a few more questions, she asked if I knew what parrot meant. I said no. Mrs. Martinez glared at me. I glared at the psychologist. Who is this person? I thought to myself, another adult with a sing-songy voice trying to be nice to me while knowing neither of us was ever going to see the other again. The psychologist asked what grade I was in. I said 2nd grade. She asked if I remembered any of my 1st grade teachers' names. I said no. She asked if I remembered the names of any of the schools I attended last year. I said no. I made an effort for some of the other questions, like measuring a pencil using a paper ruler. That part was fun. For the easier questions, I gave vague or wrong answers because I knew what she wanted me to say. I was being purposely defiant. This was an outlet for my barely contained anger. Generally, I was either morose, incensed, or just totally emotionally numb at having to move so frequently or from seeing my foster siblings move. After a while, I zoned out. I didn't care about the psychologist's questions. I didn't care about school. Adults didn't seem to take my needs seriously. So why, I thought, should I take their tests and questions seriously? Wow, I love that passage. Now, I'm old enough not to be naive. I've been a teacher for longer than I care to admit. On the surface, educators know this stuff. We talk about hierarchy of needs. We talk about food insecurity. We talk about homelessness, and we love to talk about at-risk children. Yet it's interesting, through all the bloody in-services I have sat through in my life, rarely does this knowledge align with academic expectations. As I've seen, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, that what ends up happening is we water down curriculum, lower our standards, don't give homework, coddle students to the point that the ultimate goal is so they don't throw a fit in the classroom, which means they don't have to do anything they don't want to do, and that includes schoolwork. And when that happens, well, it's just making everything so much worse. But what Henderson has done in just one paragraph has given me a slap of reality. And I need to remember that when I'm pulling my hair out because a student is arguing with me over taking notes for their online class, Why should my student give 2 bits about world geography when they feel no one gives 2 bits about them? But then I think, okay, so what do we do? Unfortunately, Henderson doesn't really give me that answer. So when Henderson is in 3rd grade, he is adopted by a loving family and has a younger sister. He's one of the fortunate ones to be adopted at a relatively young age out of foster care. But then his adopted parents get a divorce because his mom loves another woman and his dad punishes his ex-wife by not having anything to do with his adopted son. I'll let you read the rest of the book or that part of the story for yourself, but other stuff then happens, and by the time Henderson graduates high school, he's living at a friend's house. Without much of a future plan, he signs up for the military. Here is a good paragraph regarding his reflection of his life, something that I wish my students would do a little bit earlier on, maybe. And so he says, until this point, my life had been a series of adults making decisions for me. Foster parents, doctors, therapists, and social workers. I'd never had a say in the adoption, divorces, and separations. Now here I was, finally making my own decisions about how my life would unfold, and I showed up, hungover, exhausted, and hungry. That's how much thought I gave to my future. Still, when thoughts about my past entered my mind, I felt more determined than ever. I gripped my number 2 pencil and gave it my best effort. Great reflection there. He was taking a test for the military, and Henderson's military life does not go smoothly, although he does excel at his job. He has to confront his alcohol addiction and goes to treatment, but eventually ends up at Yale. Once again, I will let you read all the stuff in between. While he's at Yale, Henderson realizes some profound concepts of the rich, what he calls luxury beliefs. This is where it's no longer a story, but more of a social commentary that has no memoir structure. This is how the last 60 or so pages are. So before I address those pages, let me say a few things about Henderson's memoir part. His story is a fascinating one and rather unique. However, his memoir writing is flat. He lacks voice. His reflective paragraphs aren't too bad, but once he starts in on any dialogue or scene setting, it's a bit painful to read. Many of his dialogue exchanges could have been summarized. He even has the greetings and the goodbyes as part of the dialogue. Some of his teenage mishaps with friends don't seem all that significant to the story either, so I'm not sure why those were included. Some of the details seem extraneous as well, like always mentioning what song they listen to, etc. It's all very one-dimensional at times, monotone, and doesn't engage the reader much. And then Henderson switches gears once he enters Yale, where the book is no longer a memoir, but a nonfiction book that is attempting to prove his theory on luxury beliefs, which, according to the book jacket, is defined as ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper class while inflicting costs on the less fortunate. Henderson excels at this writing style. I wish he would have structured his book and foregone the whole memoir structure and structured it in this manner. So remember when I went on my diatribe about Dr. Drew? Okay, so here's why. Henderson gets rather political toward the end of his book, although he never mentions politics, but based on his rhetoric, we know who he's voting for. I despise political books, and I don't care what side you're on. Either extreme is just not good for the country or anyone right now or ever for that matter. By the time this episode airs, we will have a new president-elect, and Lord help us, whoever that is. I think we should have just started over with 2 new candidates. But despite all of that, Henderson brings up some intriguing points. Here's an interesting exchange he has at a party while he's at Yale. And it goes like this, if I can find it. So he says, I'd arrived at Yale nervous about the possibility of being intellectually limited compared with my peers on campus because of my impoverished background and poor grades in high school. As I encountered many of their inept ideas, my concerns evaporated. I was fascinated by this new social reality and avoided discussing my life when contentious discussions erupted. I really wanted to understand what these students thought without risking them being weirded out by someone in their midst who they might have acknowledged as having had a tougher life than them and who disagreed that words in an email could actually inflict pain. That was the language many students used. Danger and harm and pain. Words like trauma meant something different for them. At a party, a young woman told me about her family and how they'd always expected her to get into a top college. My mom was super strict growing up, she explained. Classic Asian mom. I'm sure you know what I mean. Well, my mom is Korean, I said, but my family life wasn't really like that. "Ah," she exclaimed, "so you didn't have a traumatic childhood." This is a valid point. The books I've read recently that are written by those significantly younger than me, there appears to be this sort of life is so hard and it's everyone else's responsibility to make it easier on me attitude, like colleges should be responsible for their students' mental health sort of ideas. And Henderson continues this point with this, and it's a few pages later. It's actually quite a few pages later, but you get the point. He says, furthermore, it is harder for wealthy people to claim the mantle of victimhood, which among the affluent is often a key ingredient to be seen as a righteous person. In fact, researchers at Harvard Business School and Northwestern University recently found evidence of a virtuous victim effect, in which victims are seen as more moral than non-victims who have behaved in exactly the same way. People are inclined to positively evaluate those who have suffered. Plainly, if people think you are a victim, they will be more likely to excuse your detestable behaviors. But ironically, the most well-off are also the most capable of accentuating their supposed marginalization. They can communicate their hardships in a language that other well-to-do people can understand. Prestigious universities encourage students to nurture their grievances, giving rise to a peculiar situation in which the most advantaged are the most well-equipped to tell other advantaged people how disadvantaged they are. Well stated. This kind of writing is really where he's at. Here's another excerpt when he's talking about marriage. And he is showing somewhat of this paradox here. This deterioration is still happening. In 2006, more than half American adults without a college degree believed it was very important that couples with children should be married. Fast forward to 2020, and this number has plummeted to 31%. Among college graduates, only 25% think couples should be married before having kids. Their actions, though, contradict their luxury beliefs. The vast majority of American college graduates who have children are married. Despite their behavior suggesting otherwise, affluent people are the most likely to say marriage is unimportant. Gradually, this message has spread. I've also heard graduates of top universities say marriage is just a piece of paper. People shouldn't have to prove their commitment to their spouse with a document, they tell me. I have never heard them ridicule a college degree as just a piece of paper. Many affluent people belittle marriage but not college because they view a degree as critical for their social positions. Very interesting point, a fascinating topic of conversation. But here's my problem with this chunk of the book. Henderson at times makes blanket generalizations with nothing more than an outdated article or a conversation with some random person as evidence. Can't do that. I've gotten after my woke authors for doing the same thing. Oops, I've got a co-host right now. Come here. Let's not tip stuff over. Oh, he's going to tip stuff over. Where did my glasses go? Okay, you can sit on my lap. All right, he's going to join me for the rest of this episode, I guess, if he sits still. So I've gotten after my woke authors for doing the same thing. We can't jump to extreme conclusions based on one interaction or source. So let me read you an example of this regarding Hamilton the musical. I've not seen Hamilton. I'm not fond of musicals except Grease, and I'm completely comfortable admitting that. So here's Henderson's take on the Hamilton thing. And it was really kind of an interesting point that I never thought of, if I can find it. Here's an example of how this phenomenon works. Before my first year of college, I had never been to a musical. No one I knew from Red Bluff had even ever been to one. But it seemed like everyone on campus had seen Hamilton, the exclaimed musical about the American founding father, Alexander Hamilton. I looked up tickets, $400. This was way beyond my budget. So in 2020, I was pleased to see that 5 years after Hamilton's debut, it was available to view on Disney+. But suddenly the musical was being denigrated by many of the same people who formerly enjoyed it because it didn't reflect the failings of American society in the 18th century. The creator of Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda, even posted on Twitter that all the criticisms are valid. This reveals how social class works in America. It is not a coincidence that when Hamilton tickets were prohibitively expensive, affluent people loved it, and now that it can be viewed by ordinary Americans, they ridicule it. Once something becomes too popular, the elites update their taste to distinguish themselves from ordinary people. In 2015, seeing Hamilton was a major status symbol. In 2020, it didn't mean much. And this is why the affluent suddenly turned on the musical. It's a status game with members of the upper class distancing themselves from something that had become too popular. Once a piece of art becomes mainstream, elites must distance themselves from it and redirect their attention to something new, obscure, or difficult to obtain. The affluent relentlessly search for signals that distinguish them from the masses. Okay, so this is an interesting theory, but it's not just the rich who do this. This is about 99.9% of the population, unless you're Dr. Sheldon Cooper or me, people who don't base their likes and interests on what others like or do. This Hamilton theory, as I'll call it, would be much more profound if Henderson had brought in more research, more examples to develop this theory. But he doesn't. He sprinkles these sorts of ideas throughout the last 60 pages, which did give me pause to think, which I love, but without further research, they just became random ramblings about his observations. However, that didn't diminish my reaction to his book. I have more complaints with his lack of voice in the memoir part than his sometimes extremist views on society. But here's my biggest issue with the book. While Henderson is saying that a stable family life is the key to success, more so than education, his own story contradicts that. It is education that got him where he's at. He could barely read and write, was behind 2 or 3 grade levels in elementary school, then started reading everything, but as he got older, read more nonfiction. Once he gets into Yale, he feels left out, a misfit in the midst of his elitist peers who grew up entitled in culture. He resents them a bit, if I dare say, and reflects on his traumatic childhood, one that wasn't easy and one that could have very well led him down a path to jail or even death. This paradox only frustrates me more as an educator. Maybe I was hoping Henderson held a key to how to teach at-risk students. Perhaps that was unfair of me to expect that. So I don't know where that leaves me in terms of education as key, because I feel that this book only reinforces that idea, even though he states that such prestigious education is only available to the rich. Yet he did make it. Henderson would have been better off writing a nonfiction book on his luxury beliefs and integrating his own childhood experiences within that book than writing a memoir and using such information to develop his thoughts on education. Troubled just didn't work for me with its structure and its lack of voice. However, Henderson excelled at the more essay-like structure despite some of his under-researched theories. He brings up some excellent points that are great for discussions, assuming both sides of our political landscape would ever stop and listen to one another. So is Troubled worth the read? Yes, it is. Educators should read it for sure. There's enough about schools and testing and reading and such that Henderson provides a bird's eye view of these issues we always talk about during professional development and in-services, but never quite carry out successfully into the classroom. His personal experiences are priceless in understanding the role of education in a child's life. And even if you're not a hillbilly elegy lover, I saw the movie a while ago and I've never read the book, Troubled is worth your read. Remember, whatever perspective you have of the world is not the same perspective of everyone around you, and that's okay. It really is. We can still get along and function for the greater good. You're not right and they're not wrong for such differences. We can learn from each other and we can gain perspectives of the world around us from reading outside our own bubble. Books like Troubled should open the dialogue between groups of people who don't agree and always think they're right. For if we did just a little bit more listening and reflecting on our own behavior, our country might not be so divided right now. Thanks for watching. As always, my goal at Booksmart is to get a little bit smarter, one book at a time.